Law schools just got their new employment numbers. Every single one of them is about to tell applicants the same thing. They've got record employment, best year in a decade, it's time to apply. But here is what is actually in the new American Bar Association report. Berkeley, one of the top law schools in the country, placed 36 of its graduates as clerks for federal judges last year. This year, only 18. That's half the job placement gone in 12 months. NYU's nonprofit legal placements dropped by 41 graduates in a single year. In Washington, D.C., which is the single most important city for legal jobs in America, 244 positions disappeared. And somehow, law schools are still claiming that employment went up. I spent the past couple of days going through the entire American Bar Association employment numbers report. And what's in it is not what law schools want applicants to read. So if you're thinking about a law school or you know someone who is applying to law school, this is the most important talk I've given in quite a while. Now, there's a math trick I want to share with you because you got to see it before anything else makes sense. Law schools calculate employment as a ratio, graduates with jobs divided by the total number of graduates. The class of 2025 rate came in at 87.7%, up from 87.2% last year, which sounds great on the face of it. But here's what actually happened underneath. The number of real legal jobs fell by about 2,200 in a single year. That's down about 6.5%. The graduating class fell faster. About 2,700 fewer graduates came out of law school last year. And so when the number of graduates drops faster than the number of jobs, the ratio goes up. It's just math. It's got nothing to do with the job market getting better. Here is an easier way to think about it. Picture a restaurant with 100 seats and 100 customers. It's 100% full, it's at capacity. Then the owner tears out 40 seats. The next day, 70 customers show up. They're still at capacity and even have overflow demand. But business didn't actually get better, the restaurant just got smaller. That is what happened with law schools this year. And so when a school tells you their class of 2025 was a record year, the honest version is the job market shrank, their class shrank faster. That's why the percentage looks nicer. And so while every word of that would technically be true, it doesn't mean what you think it means. Okay, so where did jobs actually disappear? The drop wasn't spread evenly. Big corporate law firms, the ones you see in TV shows, they took a small hit, about 7% fewer jobs at the biggest firms. Not great, but also not a crisis. There are three other areas, however, that got totally hammered. Government legal jobs dropped by 604 positions in a year. Lawyers working for the US government or state or local government, down 13%. Nonprofit legal jobs, meaning legal aid for people who can't afford lawyers, civil rights work, immigration help, lost 483 jobs, down 14%. Corporate in-house work, meaning lawyers inside a company instead of at a firm, lost 308 jobs, down 13%. Those three categories together account for about 2/3 of every legal job that disappeared this year, and they've all got one thing in common. They are all tied to what the federal government is doing. Government hiring for obvious reasons, nonprofits because most nonprofit legal work runs on federal grant money, and corporate in-house work because companies slow down on hiring lawyers when they can't predict what new regulations are coming. So what you're really looking at is federal policy showing up in the job data 6 months later. All right, the cleanest piece of evidence in the whole report is DC. In 1 year, the total number of law graduates placed in Washington, D.C. dropped from 1,657 to 1,413. That's 244 jobs gone. About 15% of the DC legal job market for new graduates gone in 12 months. And that is the biggest drop for any major city in the country, bigger than New York, bigger than California, bigger in Texas. And DC matters more than any other market for one reason. That is where the most federal legal hiring physically happens. The DOJ is there, the SEC is there, the IRS legal division's there. All the big federal agencies with lawyers work out of DC. And when the federal government pulls back on hiring, DC is the city that feels it first. So the law schools that got hit the hardest are the ones that built their reputation on sending graduates to Washington. Now, George Washington University is the most DC-focused law school in America. About 45% of their entire graduating class used to end up in DC. This year, down to 41%. And 4 points might not sound like a lot, but for a school whose whole pitch is, we're going to get you to DC, it's a real warning sign. Now, American University placed 146 graduates in DC last year. This year, only 134. So their DC share dropped from 38% to 33%. And American's career office actually did some pretty impressive work trying to help the students who lost offers due to the federal hiring freeze. They ran emergency alumni calls. Their dean even went on CNBC to talk about it, but they still couldn't catch the drop. Now, George Mason dropped from 70 DC placements to 51 DC placements, almost 30% of their DC pipeline gone in 1 year. Howard University lost 6 DC placements, but Howard's bigger problem is worse. Their total employment rate collapsed 15 points in a single year, from 85% down to 70%, and the share of Howard grads still looking for work 10 months after graduation jumped from 6% to 21%. 1 in 5 Howard grads was still out of work this year, one of the worst collapses in the entire ABA report. Then there are the schools where DC just fell off the map entirely. Texas had 24 DC placements last year. This year, they had so few that DC didn't even make their top 3 employment states. Same story at Wisconsin, Syracuse, Fordham, Richmond, Florida, BU, Penn State, Southern University. All of them had double-digit DC placements last year. All of them lost DC as a top destination this year. And so if you were planning to go to one of those schools specifically because it had a federal pipeline, that pipeline narrowed a lot in the past year. Now, you might be wondering what caused all of this, and here's the backstory in case you're not aware. In January 2025, a new executive order froze federal hiring. Within a week, the Department of Justice started calling law students and started taking back job offers that had already been accepted. And these were jobs that were signed, accepted, apartment already rented kind of jobs. One student at Vermont Law had his DOJ offer pulled after he'd already signed a lease near his new office. A 2L at Seton Hall lost an IRS job he turned down private law firms to take. William and Mary's dean counted 6 offers pulled in the span of a single week. Georgia State had 4 IRS offers pulled in a week. Harvard's career office sent out an emergency email warning students their offers would be canceled. The DOJ Honors Program, which is the main way the DOJ hires new law graduates every year, basically stopped entirely for the class of 2025. That program normally places over 100 graduates. This year, almost none. Now, hiring freezes have happened before. Obama froze federal hiring back in 2011, but the difference this time is that previous freezes didn't take back offers that had already been accepted. This one did, and that's new. So the 604 lost government jobs in this year's report are the receipt for it. Now, here's the part almost nobody's talking about, and once you see this, the whole picture changes. Not every law school lost DC jobs, some actually gained. Harvard, for example, gained 14 DC placements, went from 107 up to 121, and so their share of graduates going to DC actually grew this year. Georgetown added 6, even though they were already the second biggest DC feeder in the country. Virginia added 4. Yale, Stanford, and the other top schools held steady or inched up. And so think about what that means. The hiring freeze didn't kill federal legal hiring, it just concentrated it at elite schools. And so the agencies that kept hiring through exceptions and carve-outs mostly kept hiring from the same small group of top law schools they've always hired from. The schools one level down, especially the ones whose whole pitch was, we're a cheaper way to get to DC, those lost ground. And so picture a big company that normally hires 100 new employees a year from 20 different colleges. Now they've got to cut back to 70. But they don't cut evenly. They cut the backup law schools first and keep their main pipeline at the top 5 schools mostly intact. That's really what happened with federal legal hiring this year. And this is the most important pattern in the entire ABA report, and nobody else is really talking about this, not sure why. But I'll say this. I mean, if you're looking at a school like American or George Mason or Catholic or any of the mid-tier schools that market themselves as a cheaper path to federal work, you've got to be realistic about the degree that you're buying. It's not the same product it was 3 years ago. The numbers have specifically softened at exactly the schools that sell federal access the hardest. Now, that doesn't mean don't attend. It means don't pay full tuition. You want to negotiate hard for that scholarship money because the price made sense when the outcomes were reliable, but the outcomes have gotten less reliable, and so the price should follow. Okay, now the strangest part of all this is the federal clerkships. A quick explainer if you're new to this. A federal clerkship is a job working directly for a federal judge for a year or two after you graduate. It's one of the most prestigious jobs a new lawyer can get, and almost all of them go to graduates from top schools. Now, federal clerkships were supposed to be totally separate from the hiring freeze. Federal judges hire their own clerks, and the executive order didn't touch the judicial branch. Harvard's student newspaper even ran a piece in early 2025 saying federal clerkships were, quote, unaffected by the freeze. But then the numbers came in. Start with Berkeley, for example. They had 36 federal clerkships last year. This year, 18, half the jobs gone. Virginia, Columbia, Harvard, Yale, and Chicago all lost positions. So did Cornell, Duke, Boston as well. A handful of schools actually held steady or went up a little bit. Stanford picked up 2, Georgetown added 2. But the pattern is pretty clear. Almost every top school with a real federal clerkship pipeline saw those jobs drop in the exact same year the hiring freeze hit, even though federal clerkships legally have nothing to do with the freeze. And nobody can fully explain why. Judicial hiring, it's not like it's transparent. There are some theories floating around, like more federal judges delaying retirement, fewer older judges cutting back, more judges wanting clerks with a couple years of firm experience instead of brand new grads. Some of this has been building for years. The freeze may have just sped it up. But either way, the takeaway is this. Even the backup plan for top-tier law grads narrowed this year. Berkeley losing half its clerkship placements tells you something's going on. Now let's talk about NYU before we talk about what to do with all of this. NYU's nonprofit legal placements went from 115 to 74 in a single year. They lost 41 of those jobs, biggest nonprofit law drop at any school in the country. Berkeley lost 25, Columbia lost 24, Stanford and Boston College both lost 14 each. And so these top law schools' nonprofit pipelines got hit harder than any other tier, and it's not random. A big share of nonprofit legal work runs on federal grant money. When the federal government freezes hiring and delays contracts, the nonprofits downstream of that funding have to cut their positions. At the same time, the graduates whose DOJ offers got canceled flooded into the nonprofit job pool, competing for the same shrinking pile of jobs. And that's a second-order effect, doesn't tend to make the news. It shows up in the data 8 months later. NYU losing 41 nonprofit jobs isn't really a story about NYU. It's a story about how fast a policy change can ripple through job markets that don't look connected until they break. Okay, so if you're thinking about law school, what do you actually do with all of this, right? Understand that a law degree isn't one job market. It's a dozen different job markets connected to each other. Government, nonprofit, federal judges, state judges, big firms, small firms, solo practice, in-house at companies, academia. Each one has its own hiring cycle and its own risks. One executive order reshaped 3 of those markets in 6 months. That's how fast this can move under you. So if you're picking a law school in 2026, based on what the job market looked like in 2023, that means you're planning with outdated information. Law school is a 3-year commitment and a 10 to 20-year debt load. A lot can change in 3 years. Now, the schools that protect you when policy shifts are the ones with multiple paths out. If every type of employer your school feeds into is connected, meaning when one dries up, the others dry up too, you're exposed. Schools with broad networks across multiple cities and industries have backups, but regional schools with tight federal pipelines don't in the same way. So here is an easy check you can do in under 5 minutes. Pull up any law school's employment report, look at the top 3 cities their graduates end up in, and the top 3 types of employers. If any one city is more than 40% of the class and any one type of employer is more than 30% of the class, that school is concentrated, and that means they're exposed. Now, when you read any law school's numbers, don't focus on the percentages, focus on the raw count, the absolute numbers. Look at how many actual full-time legal jobs they placed last year, compare it to the year before, compare it to 5 years ago. Is it up? Is it down? Or is it flat? A school placing 200 real legal jobs is doing something totally different from a school placing 80, even if the percentages look similar. Then ask admissions the questions they don't want to answer. How many of your class of 2025 had offers pulled? What did your career office do for them? What's your federal clerkship trend over the last 3 years? What percentage of your current class is still looking for work 10 months after graduation? If they give you real answers, you've learned something valuable. If they hedge or they don't want to answer, or if they're vague, you've learned even more. Now, I want to be upfront about something here. Of course, I teach the LSAT for a living. I run an LSAT coaching business. So you should know that's my job. Before I make this last point, I'd rather tell you my bias than pretend I don't have one. But here's the argument anyway. Your LSAT score doesn't really predict whether you're going to be a good lawyer, and that's not what it's trying to do. What your LSAT score actually controls is which law schools admit you, what scholarship money they offer, which city you end up in for 3 years, whose alumni network you join, and how much debt you take on. And every one of those things matters more in a market like this one than it did 3 years ago. Think about that graduate whose DOJ offer got pulled in February of their last year of law school. If they're at Yale, the career office makes calls for them. The alumni network's going to take care of them. They're going to land somewhere reasonable. But if you're at a regional school that charged full tuition and sold you on federal access, you're in real trouble. The difference is the school. It's not your intelligence or your work ethic. It's literally the reputation and the network of the school that you go to. Your LSAT score is the single biggest lever on which side of that line you end up on. Nothing else in the application is close. If you can jump your LSAT score from a 160 up to a 170, you're in a totally different tier. You're getting more scholarship money, taking on less debt. You end up in a different city, have a different career. Your life ends up in a different place because of 10 points on one test. And you don't have to like the LSAT. You don't have to think it's fair. But you've got to know that it is the tool available to you, whether you like it or not. So take it seriously. You get options. If you don't, you won't. Now, the class of 2025 is the first class whose data fully shows what federal policy can do to the law school pipeline. Probably not going to be the last. The class of 2026 is already scrambling. The class of 2027 is doing on-campus interviews right now, assuming the federal job market's back to normal, but I wouldn't bank on that assumption. If you're in the middle of the application cycle and the offices are telling you everything's fine because the rate went up, remember two things. The employment rate went up because the graduating class got smaller, and 244 DC legal jobs disappeared from the national totals in a single year. So take it seriously, that's all I'm saying. Take the LSAT seriously, look at the actual numbers, and don't trust the marketing brochures in a market like this one. If you'd like my help getting a higher LSAT score, getting into better schools, getting better employment outcomes, getting more scholarship money, I'm happy to help you out. No strings attached. I'm offering a free LSAT tutoring lesson for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring with me is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below this video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now and later. I've also put together a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. The link to get that free cheat sheet is unpluggedprep.com/cheat sheet. The link is in the video description on YouTube and in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. No strings attached, totally free. It's what I wish I knew back when I was studying for the LSAT. I compiled it all for you in a free downloadable that you can access anytime, anywhere. Now, I see some questions here in the chat. I'll get to as many of those as I can. Open offer to answer any and all questions, anything LSAT and law school admissions. Feel free to keep them coming. Matrix Invader asks, you can revoke offers after acceptance for jobs. I thought that was illegal. Great question. It seems reasonable to me that if you've signed an employment contract and you've relocated yourself, signed an apartment lease on the promise of a job, that they shouldn't be able to revoke it like that quite so easily. But I'm not an expert on employment law, and it seems to me that any of these sorts of things, there's typically exceptions when it comes to the federal government because they can carve out exceptions for themselves. Not saying it's right or fair, but that's what it is. I think that's part of the problem here with that when you have a federal government that's kind of unreliable, to say the least, based on executive orders turning things upside down without warning overnight. That poses a serious problem, and it's not right or not fair for people. And unfortunately, that's what happened. So I'm just trying to advise folks going forward how to avoid being placed in that situation. Joe says, I'm seeking a JD, just got into Boston University. Any tips? I appreciate it, sir. Okay, so Did you just get into BU for undergrad and now you're thinking about pursuing law school down the line? Because if so, I mean, you just started undergrad, you still got 4 years, right? Before you're applying. So plenty of time to take the LSAT. But before that, I would focus on maintaining a high undergraduate GPA. If you're still in undergrad, that's the number one thing you could do for yourself right now. The LSAT's not going anywhere. You could come back to it in a couple years. So when you're a high school senior and entering a freshman, it's premature to study for the LSAT. And theoretically, your LSAT score is good for 5 years. So for that reason, you could take the LSAT now and lock in that score. But I'd say for now, enjoy undergrad, enjoy freshman year, figure out what you're going to major in, decide whether law school is right for you, take classes that will allow you to maintain a high GPA, explore the practice of law, maybe do an internship or two at law firms, get some real world exposure. And then if the LSAT is truly what you want to pursue, if law school is really what you want to do, then circle back. I'm not going anywhere. The LSAT's not going anywhere. OB says, always go for scholarships, never pay. Yeah, I mean, I think that in general, it's good to be favorably inclined towards going to a lower ranked law school with more scholarship money than a higher ranked law school with less scholarship money. I think that's the prudent move. Not saying you should always go for scholarships over prestige, but when you take the scholarship money, when you get a full ride, you mitigate risk and you keep your employment options open. And the world is changing all the time. And so what's not changing is that your employment outcomes are better with a JD than without a JD. You are more employable and have a higher earning potential, especially if you want to go into big law with the JD on your resume. But of course, things can evolve and change, and taking on the debt could put you in a tight spot down the line. So I know that a lot of my videos talk about how law schools are a little bit sneakier or tricky about the data, the scholarship numbers, the employment numbers. You just want to go with your eyes open. I think that law school is a great path forward for many people, but you also want to know what you're getting into, and you're treating it like the six-figure investment it is. Nathan is saying, is it curtains if you don't get into a top law school? I wouldn't say that. I mean, I think that you want to have the profile, you want to have the application, you want to have the LSAT score and the GPA. That would get you into a top law school, but oftentimes it's better to choose to go to a lower ranked law school with more scholarship money than to go to a higher ranked law school with less scholarship money. So you want to be able to get into the top law school, but in many cases, you may want to choose scholarships over prestige. G is asking, what is the best way to prep for the LSAT? It's a big question. It's one I've really devoted my entire career to answering. It comes down to a couple things. I divide LSAT prep into 3 major phases: accuracy, pacing, and endurance. Accuracy is building a strong foundation in the different sections and the different question types, understanding the proper perspective from which to view each LSAT section and each question type. Pacing is doing individual timed sections to work on your time allocation, how you're investing your time over the course of that 35-minute section. And then endurance is doing full-length timed practice tests, simulating test day so that you're not getting fatigued on section 4 just because it is section 4. And so one thing we do for our students at LSAT Unplugged is we help you craft a personal study plan, laying out exactly what to do every single day from now till your test. So let's say you've got roughly 3 months between now and your LSAT. Say you're taking it in August, for example. You might devote month 1 to focusing on the foundation, the accuracy phase, drilling questions by type. Month 2, you devote to pacing, doing individual sections. Month 3, focused on full-length timed practice tests. And so that could be, broadly speaking, you spend May on foundational work, June on pacing with individual sections, July with full exams, and then you're ready for test day in August. I'm not saying don't do practice tests until July. Of course, you want to sprinkle them in a little bit earlier, but each month should, broadly speaking, have that general emphasis. The reason being that you don't want to take a ton of practice tests before learning what the test is actually testing you on. You want to understand the material, but you also don't want to delay practice tests for too long because you want to be familiar with the test day flow, because test day is not a drill. It's not enough to get the questions right. You got to get them right under test day conditions, considering pacing and time management and endurance. A lot of students will say, I can get the questions right untimed, but when you introduce timing, that's when things fall apart. And my thought is then, well, let's simulate test day so that you are accustomed to the time constraint. You do know how to pace yourself. You have that internal rhythm in mind so that you can get through a section with time to spare, and your performance is not dropping on section 4 just because it is section 4. I see Danny's saying, I'm about to take a practice test. Awesome. Good luck on that. Remember that when you take a practice test, it's 2 sections back to back, 35 minutes each. So that's 70 minutes in total for the first half of the exam. You take a 10-minute break, then you do 2 more sections back to back, and that's your test. So no pausing the clock to go to the bathroom, get a snack, check your phone. No chatting with your roommates or significant others. You're not going to be able to do it on test day, so don't do it during your practice test either. And you don't want to over-index on any single individual practice test because it could be an outlier. You want to look at your most recent 5 practice tests, take the average of those 5, and that's going to be the best indication of where you stand. So don't over-index on the high outliers or the low outliers. Any one exam could play to your strengths more than another, and when you take 5 of them together over the span of a couple of weeks, that'll be a more accurate representation of how you're likely to do on test day. Also keep in mind that the typical student is dropping 5 to 8 points from the practice to the actual, and so you want to raise your baseline so that you have a buffer in place. Let's say you have a bad proctor or a tech issue, you want to score your goal on your worst day and hopefully doing better, assuming that everything goes smoothly. Danny's asking, do they let you have snacks during the exam or just your pencil and ID? So you could have snacks during the break. You have a 10-minute break between sections 2 and 3. You can look up all the LSAT test day rules on the LSAC website. Keep in mind the rules are a little bit different between taking the LSAT remotely from home and in person at a Prometric testing center. The June LSAT is the last one where you can take it remotely from home. Starting with August, it's going to be in person for everyone, with rare exceptions due to medical accommodations or hardship in traveling a long distance to take it in person. And that's because of some LSAT cheating that has been going on over the past couple of years, ever since the LSAT went remote. LSAC is cracking down on that. They're also changing up the interface for the online LSAT starting in August, and you can practice that on the lsac.org website. Don't take the practice tests out of a book, though I see Danny's commenting about a test prep book. The LSAT is on the computer, regardless of whether you take it remotely or in person. You want to get familiar with the testing interface, the software. That's another reason that student scores often drop, is because they're not familiar with the software. And so don't use a book, don't use some third-party software, don't use ChatGPT. Use real official LSAT questions published by the Law School Admission Council. There are books of those exams on Amazon, but much better to use the LSAC Law Hub platform. You get 4 practice tests for free on that platform. You get the others, which there are 59 in total, with your LSAC Law Hub Advantage subscription. Well worth the investment. It's $120 for a year of access, and you really need those no matter how you're studying for the LSAT. Of course, those are the focus of our coaching programs. We're always using the official LSAC practice questions. The thing, though, is that unfortunately those practice questions do not come with explanations in most cases. And so if you want some guidance and some feedback on what you're getting wrong, why you're getting it wrong, some help crafting your LSAT plan of attack, I'm offering a free LSAT tutoring lesson for everybody watching this now or later. The link to book that free tutoring lesson with me personally is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. I've also put together a free easy LSAT cheat sheet to help you jumpstart your LSAT prep. It has everything in it I wish that I knew back when I was first studying for the LSAT, everything on both logical reasoning and reading comprehension. It's 100% free. You can access the cheat sheet, get your own digital copy, downloading it in the video link in the description on YouTube or in my bio on TikTok and Instagram, covering every question type, every section, both logical reasoning and reading comprehension. So feel free to grab your copy if you haven't already. I just revamped it, pretty excited to share it with all of you. Hope that you find it useful. Feel free to keep those questions coming on anything at all LSAT and law school admissions. I will get to as many of those as I can. See a question asking, how should I think while I'm taking the practice test? Well, I would be thinking about a couple things. The first, I mentioned before, pacing, right? How are you allocating your time over the course of the section? How do you make sure you're not running out of time at the end of the section with questions remaining? How do you make sure that you're not fatiguing on section 4 just because it is section 4? So I'll give you some pacing guidelines here. Take logical reasoning, for example. Logical reasoning is 2/3 of the LSAT. You get 35 minutes to solve roughly 25 questions. So you have about a minute and 20 seconds or so per question, but some questions are easier and harder than others. So for that reason, I would recommend that you try to solve the first 10 questions in roughly 10 minutes because they are easier than average. So 10 questions in 10 minutes for the first 10 in the section. You then build up a time bank that you can apply to the tougher questions later in the section that truly need it. Then if you encounter a difficult question in particular, you flag it, you skip it, you come back to it later. You don't want to get bogged down or stuck on any one question. Every single question on the LSAT is worth the same, and there's also no guessing penalty. In reading comprehension, you've got 4 passages in 35 minutes, meaning you have an average of 8 minutes and 45 seconds per passage. Some are easier and harder than others, though, so I wouldn't ever time yourself on individual passages. But within that 8 minutes and 45 seconds, I would recommend spending roughly 3 minutes reading the passage, the other 5 minutes and 45 seconds solving the questions associated with the passage. If you spend 5 minutes on the read, you've got like 30 seconds per question, not nearly enough time. So limit yourself on the initial read and feel free to go back to the passage as you need to help you solve individual questions. Now, you can also approach the questions in a particular order that works best for you. You don't have to do the questions in reading comp in the order that they are presented. I typically recommend solving the general, global, main idea, and primary purpose questions first. Knock those out. Those are general, global, big picture. Then solve the more detail-oriented questions next that have you going back to the passage. And then finally saving the more inferential questions for last that require a bit more reading between the lines. And if you're new to the LSAT, if any of this is unfamiliar, that's totally fine. Everyone's got to start somewhere. If you take a practice test, you'll get a more accurate read on where you stand and what you got to work on. And of course, I'm happy to meet with you personally to talk you through your LSAT prep. During those free LSAT tutoring lessons, we look at where you're currently scoring if you've taken a practice test, what your goal score is, and what your time frame is. We map out a plan to get you from your current starting point up to your goal score by your target test date whenever you're taking it, whether it's June or August or September or beyond. Again, you can book that free LSAT tutoring with me if you haven't already. The link to book it is unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram. Again, that's an open offer for everybody watching this now or later. Happy to help you out. I see Matrix Invaders asking, the question flagging tool is being taken away after June, is that right? So my understanding is that it's not been taken away. It's more that it's been made less useful. This relates to that user interface change I was talking about earlier. LSAC is not only changing the LSAT format back to in-person only with rare exceptions, but they're also changing the software as well. They've made it less user-friendly, less intuitive, more clunky, harder to use. Not a good change in any way. I suppose the changes they're making are also just helping to prevent cheating, aside from making it harder for anybody to take the LSAT, of course. But there is still going to be a flagging function, just a lot less useful, a lot harder to use, unfortunately. Inez is asking, how do I maintain motivation during those frustrating study days? I'm struggling. Yeah, it's tough. I mean, LSAT prep can really be a slog. It's hard to go it alone when you don't know anybody else who's doing this. So one thing I'd recommend is trying to build a community with other people studying for the LSAT at the same time. In our program at LSAT Unplugged, we actually facilitate study groups in addition to our proper classes with instructors. And so you can connect with other students who are also studying for the same LSAT as you are and connect with them over Zoom or FaceTime or Google Meet and have a study buddy, go over LSAT questions together or just take practice tests together. Also keep in mind, what is your why? Like, why do you want to go to law school? What's your goal? both in terms of your dream school that you want to attend and then what are your career goals. Try to keep that front of mind just to keep yourself motivated when the going gets tough. And also don't overtly focus on any one particular LSAT practice test result. A negative outlier doesn't define you. Neither does a high positive result, of course. Again, you want to take the average to get a more balanced view of where you currently stand. But having a study buddy or a coach or a tutor can really do a lot to keep you motivated. And if you want to meet with me personally, I'm happy to have that conversation with you. You could book that free tutoring lesson with me personally at unpluggedprep.com/start. Link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram as well. That is an open offer, again, for anyone watching this now or later. I see Fadi's asking, should I retake a 172 LSAT result? I'm a Stanford undergrad, a senior with a 3.7 GPA, aiming for a top 14 law school. I mean, a 3.7 GPA is a good GPA, of course, but technically speaking, it is below the top 14 law school LSAT medians. The GPA medians, I mean, the top 14 law schools all have GPA medians of roughly 3.9. And so while a 3.7 is a good GPA, it's a whole 0.2 below their median. So you do want to balance that with a higher LSAT score to compensate. A 172 LSAT score is at some of the medians, above some, below others for the T14. The T14 LSAT medians range from 170 to 174. And so if you're below on the GPA median, you ideally want to be above on the LSAT median to compensate. So for that reason, yeah, I think I would entertain retaking a 172. If you could get a 175, you'll be in a much better position. See that you're following up that you're a biology major. Useful context, but the numbers are still the numbers. Obviously harder to maintain a 4.0 GPA in STEM than in humanities, but at the same time, law schools look at the GPA as the GPA because that's what they are reporting to the American Bar Association, which in turn is where US News is pulling their data from for the US News rankings. So I'd say retake the 172, get a higher LSAT score. I see Anna saying, does getting a 170 or so in a 3-month time frame feel realistic, or do I need more time? So you're asking, can you score a 170 in 3 months with full-time studying? Maybe. Where are you scoring right now? Have you taken a practice test? Are you brand new to LSAT prep, or have you been studying for a while? I mean, a 170 puts you in the top 3% or so, top 3-4%. So it's a great score, of course. It's a unique score and requires quite a bit of work. 3 months is not a lot of time, but if you can study full time, that might do a lot to get your score up. But we got to look at what your starting point is. And then what kind of studying are you doing? It's a function of ultimately the amount that you study and the way in which you study. So if you could devote the time and you can also get the proper support, that's going to do a lot to maximize the score that you can achieve. But I can't say without more context whether it's possible or not. I need to have more background on where you're currently at and then what you're going to do for your prep. Are you going to self-study out of prep books? Or are you going to take a course? Or are you going to get coaching? Because the thing is that when you're studying on your own, you don't know what you don't know. But once we add some support into the mix, there's usually a pretty quick score boost, meaning there's going to be a lot of low-hanging fruit. And so if you want to talk through what your prep plan look like to maximize the efficiency of your study over those 3 months to get you that 170 by August, I'm happy to help you out and see what we can do to put together a custom program for you. For anyone watching, you can book that free tutoring with me at unpluggedprep.com/start. The link is below the video on YouTube, pinned in the chat on YouTube, in my bio on TikTok and Instagram. Happy to help you out. Jade is asking, if I did early college and my GPA was a 3.35, but undergraduate GPA is a 3.93, will they consider one more than the other? So when LSAC calculates your GPA, when they interpret your transcripts, they're looking at all of the credits that go into comprising your bachelor's degree. And so the question is, does the early college GPA get factored into earning you your bachelor's? It very well may, but that's ultimately the answer to that question. It could be the 393 alone from undergrad or the 393 blended with the 3.35. I would get your transcripts forwarded to LSAC and have them calculated, and then you'll know for sure, assuming that you're done with undergrad, of course. It's possible the early college will drag down your undergraduate GPA a bit, which is a A shame, unfortunately, but it is what it is. At least you'll have demonstrated an upward trend. And regardless of whatever your GPA ends up turning out to be, you can still balance it out with a higher LSAT score to compensate. Your LSAT score weighs more heavily than your undergraduate GPA. Anyway, GPA is important, plays a role, but the LSAT score matters more. For those just joining, by the way, I do these lives every single weekday, same time, same place, 2 p.m. Eastern, 1 Central, 11 Pacific, here on YouTube, TikTok, Instagram, wherever you're watching this. I'll be back on Monday, same time, same place. In the meantime, all the best. Take care. Thanks for joining.